The morning of December 18, 1944, arrived over the Ardennes forest with a silence that felt almost unnatural. Thick fog rolled through the snow-laden pines, reducing visibility to mere yards. The air carried that peculiar stillness that comes before something momentous, a quiet so profound that even the birds seemed to have abandoned the forest. For the men of the 3rd Armored Division's reconnaissance units, this silence was more unnerving than any artillery barrage. Corporal James Mitchell sat in the gunner's seat of his M4 Sherman tank, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air inside the turret. At 23 years old, he was already a veteran of 5 major engagements across France and Belgium. His hands, calloused and steady, rested on the traversing mechanism of his 75mm main gun. But it wasn't the main gun that would make history that day. It was the .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the turret, and more specifically, how Mitchell chose to use it. The German offensive that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge was in full swing. 3 days earlier, 250,000 German troops had launched a desperate gamble through the Ardennes, hoping to split the Allied forces and capture the vital port of Antwerp. The offensive had caught the Americans off guard. Entire regiments found themselves surrounded or overrun. Communication lines were cut, supply routes severed. In the chaos, small units like Mitchell's crew found themselves operating independently, making decisions that doctrine and training manuals never quite prepared them for. Mitchell's tank, nicknamed Iron Prayer by its crew, had been separated from its company during a hasty withdrawal the previous evening. Now, as dawn struggled to penetrate the fog, the 5-man crew found themselves positioned at a crossroads near the small Belgian village of Manhay. Their orders were simple: hold the position until reinforcements arrived. But in the fog, with German forces probing every weak point in the American lines, simple orders often proved anything but simple to execute. The tank commander, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, stood in the turret hatch, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the tree line. Hayes was 31, older than most tank commanders, a former school teacher from Ohio who had joined up after Pearl Harbor. His calm demeanor under fire had earned him the respect of every man in his crew, but even Hayes couldn't hide the tension in his voice when he spoke. "Mitchell, I need you sharp today. We're blind in this soup, and intelligence reports suggest heavy armor is moving through this sector." "Yes, sir," Mitchell replied, his Georgia drawl softening the military formality. "Gun is loaded and ready. Main gun has high explosive and armor-piercing rounds alternated. The .50 cal is fully loaded, and I've got extra belts within arm's reach." Below them, in the driver's position, Private First Class Anthony Russo made a sign of the cross. The Brooklyn native had been doing that more frequently as the battles grew fiercer. Beside him, the assistant driver and bow gunner, Private Eddie Coleman, checked his .30 caliber machine gun for the 3rd time in as many minutes. In the turret with Mitchell and Hayes, Corporal William Doc Henderson served as the loader. A former medical student, Henderson had steady hands and a quick mind, qualities that made him invaluable in the chaos of armored combat. The fog began to shift as the temperature rose slightly. Visibility improved from yards to perhaps 50 meters. It was then that Henderson heard it first, a low rumble that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, the distinctive mechanical growl of heavy engines. "Sir, you hear that?" Henderson's voice was tight. Hayes tilted his head, listening. The sound grew louder, a deep, throaty roar that could only mean one thing: tanks, multiple tanks, and from the sound of it, they were big. "Positions, everyone. Stay silent. Mitchell, traverse left, slowly. Coleman, eyes on that tree line to our 2 o'clock. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, each man settling into his role. Mitchell's hands gripped the controls, his right eye pressed to the gun sight. His world narrowed to the circle of view through the optics, a small window into the fog-shrouded forest ahead. Then they appeared, like gray ghosts materializing from the mist. The first shape that emerged was unmistakable to anyone who had faced German armor. The angular, sloped frontal armor, the long menacing barrel, the interleaved road wheels, Panther tanks, and not just one or two. As the fog continued to lift, Mitchell's blood ran cold. 8 Panthers were moving in a column along the road, with several half-tracks and infantry following behind them. 8 Panthers, multiple support vehicles, Hayes whispered into the intercom, his voice remarkably steady. We're seriously outgunned here, gentlemen. Our 75mm won't penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at this range, and if we fire and miss, they'll obliterate us in seconds. The Panther tank was one of Germany's most formidable weapons. Introduced in 1943, it mounted a powerful 75mm long-barreled gun that could penetrate American armor at ranges exceeding a mile. Its sloped frontal armor was nearly impervious to the American Sherman's gun unless fired at extremely close range or from the sides and rear. A single Panther could typically handle 3 or 4 Shermans in a straight fight. 8 Panthers against 1 Sherman wasn't a fight. It was target practice. "Sir, should we pull back?" Henderson asked, his voice barely audible. Hayes was silent for a moment, watching the German column through his binoculars. The Panthers were moving slowly, cautiously, their commanders scanning for threats. They hadn't spotted the lone American tank yet, partially concealed behind a bombed-out barn at the crossroads. If we pull back now, they'll hear the engine. We'd be running with our backs to them, and they'd cut us down before we made 50 yards. We hold position. Complete silence. The crew barely breathed as the German column advanced. The lead Panther was now less than 300 yards away. Its commander, visible in the turret hatch, swept the area with binoculars. Mitchell could see the Balkenkreuz, the German cross insignia, painted on the tank's turret. He could see the spare track links hung on the hull for additional protection. He could even see the frost on the Panther's gun barrel. Time seemed to slow. The rumble of the German engines filled the air, drowning out all other sounds. Mitchell's finger rested near the trigger of the .50 caliber machine gun, though he knew it would be useless against the heavy armor of the Panthers. The .50 cal was designed for anti-aircraft work and engaging soft targets like trucks or infantry. Against a Panther's armor, it would be like throwing pebbles at a castle wall. The German column continued its advance, now just 200 yards away. The lead Panther commander was looking directly in their direction. Had he seen them? Mitchell's heart hammered in his chest. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. Every instinct screamed at him to fire, to do something, anything, but Hayes's command to hold position kept him frozen. Then something unexpected happened. The lead Panther stopped. Its engine note changed as the driver downshifted. The commander raised his hand, signaling the column to halt. Behind him, the other 7 Panthers ground to a stop, spacing themselves along the road at intervals of about 30 yards. "Why are they stopping?" Coleman whispered over the intercom. Hayes studied the scene through his binoculars. "Looks like they're checking their maps. The commander of the lead tank is conferring with someone, probably getting new orders or confirming their route." This was both an opportunity and a disaster. With the Panthers stationary, they were easier targets for the Sherman's main gun, but only if Mitchell could get side shots on them, where their armor was thinner. From their current angle, all the Panthers presented their heavily armored front glosses. A 75mm shell would simply bounce off. But there was something else. With the Panthers stopped, their commanders were exposed. Several had opened their hatches to get better visibility in the fog. Infantry had dismounted from the half-tracks and were gathering around the tanks, probably receiving orders. The Germans, confident in their armor's superiority and believing themselves to be deep in captured territory, had let their guard down. It was then that an idea began to form in Mitchell's mind. It was completely contrary to everything he'd been taught at the Armored Warfare School at Fort Knox. It violated standard operating procedures. It would likely get him court-martialed if it didn't get him eliminated first. But as he studied the scene before him, calculating distances and angles, he realized it might be their only chance. The doctrine was clear. A tank's primary weapon was its main gun. The machine guns were secondary weapons used for suppressing infantry or engaging light vehicles. No one used a .50 caliber machine gun against tanks. It was pointless. The bullets couldn't penetrate armor. Standard practice was to engage with the main gun, and if that failed, you retreated to fight another day. But Mitchell had noticed something during previous engagements. He'd noticed how German tank crews reacted when under fire, even from weapons that couldn't harm their tanks. He'd noticed their patterns, their instincts, instincts, their training, and he'd developed a theory, one that he'd never been able to test because no sane tank commander would waste ammunitions on an approach that wasn't in the manual. "Sir," Mitchell said quietly over the intercom, "I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." Hayes turned slightly in the turret. "I'm listening, but make it quick. They could start moving again any second." "The 50 cal, sir. If I could get continuous fire on those commanders' hatches and viewports, I might be able to force them to button up and blind them temporarily. If they close their hatches and rely only on their periscopes, their visibility drops to almost nothing in this fog. While they're blind and stationary, we could reposition to get flank shots with the main gun." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "Mitchell, that's insane. You'd be announcing our position to 8 Panthers. They'd turn every gun on us." "Not if I do it right, sir. Standard doctrine says to fire short, controlled bursts with the 50 cal, 3 to 5 round bursts at most. But what if I don't do that? What if I put continuous fire on them? Longer bursts, walking the rounds across the entire column. If I keep the gun firing almost continuously, with only brief pauses to prevent overheating, I could create enough chaos and confusion to make them react defensively instead of offensively." Henderson spoke up from the loader's position. "He's right about the visibility, sir. I've seen Panther crews button up under machine gun fire before, even though the rounds can't hurt them. It's instinct. Bullets cracking past your head make you duck, even when you're safe." Hayes chewed his lip, thinking. Every second of delay was a second the Germans might start moving again, eliminating their slim chance. "What's your plan for when they do locate us and return fire?" "That's where it gets tricky, sir. I need you to be ready to give Russo directions for immediate movement. The second I stop firing, we need to be moving to a new position, preferably one where we can get side shots on at least some of those Panthers. The barn ruins to our left might give us that angle. The barn's only 50 yards away. We'd be dangerously close." "Exactly, sir. Too close for their turrets to traverse quickly enough if we do this right. And in the fog and confusion, they might not even realize how close we are until it's too late." Hayes looked at the German column, then back at Mitchell. In his mind, he was running through every possible outcome. This wasn't in any manual. It wasn't what they'd trained for. If it went wrong, all 5 of them would likely perish in the next few minutes. But if they did nothing, the Panther column would eventually move on, probably straight into American positions where they'd wreak havoc. And if they tried a conventional attack, 1 Sherman against 8 Panthers, the outcome was equally certain. Sometimes, Hayes realized, leadership meant making decisions that had no right answer, only less wrong ones. "All right, Mitchell, you've got 1 chance at this, but you do exactly as I say when I say it. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Russo, you listening?" "Yes, sir," came the driver's voice, tight with tension. "When I give the word, you're going to move us to that barn ruin on our left, fast but controlled. Get us to the far side where we'll have cover and a better angle on those Panthers. Can you do that in this terrain?" "I can do it, sir. Ground's frozen solid, should have good traction. Coleman, the second we start moving, you put fire on any infantry you can see. Keep their heads down." "Roger that, sir." Hayes took a deep breath. "Henderson, you're going to be loading faster than you ever have before. Once we're in position, Mitchell will be engaging with the main gun, armor-piercing first, then alternate with high explosive for the support vehicles. Speed and accuracy are everything." "I'm ready, sir." Hayes turned to Mitchell. "This whole thing depends on you creating enough chaos in the next 60 seconds to blind and confuse those Panthers. Can you do it?" Mitchell's hands were steady on the 50 caliber's controls. He'd already calculated his firing pattern. He would start with the lead Panther, walk the fire back through the entire column, then reverse direction. He would aim for viewports, hatches, vision blocks, anything that the commanders and gunners used to see. He would fire in longer bursts than doctrine allowed, 4 to 6 seconds per burst, with only 1 or 2 seconds between bursts to prevent barrel overheating. It would burn through ammunition at an alarming rate. But if it worked, they wouldn't need to worry about conservation. "I can do it, sir. Then God be with us all." "Mitchell, execute when ready." Mitchell took 1 more breath, exhaled slowly, and pressed the trigger. The 50 caliber machine gun erupted with a thunderous roar. The heavy weapon, firing nearly 400 rounds per minute, sent streams of half-inch diameter bullets streaking toward the German column. Mitchell's aim was precise, walking the rounds across the lead Panther's turret, sparking off the armor, ricocheting off the steel in brilliant flashes. He moved his aim to the commander's hatch just as the German officer was beginning beginning to react. The commander ducked down into the turret, slamming the hatch shut. Mitchell didn't pause. He traversed to the second Panther, pouring fire into its vision blocks and periscopes. Glass shattered. Bullets pinged and sparked off armor. The sound was deafening, a continuous hammering that echoed across the frozen landscape. The German infantry, caught in the open, scattered for cover. Return fire began to crack through the air, but it was uncoordinated. Panicked, Mitchell continued his firing pattern, moving methodically from tank to tank, his bursts lasting 5, sometimes 6 seconds before he paused briefly to prevent the barrel from overheating. The 4th Panther's commander, slower to react than his comrades, was caught in the open. Mitchell's stream of fire forced him to abandon his position, dropping into the turret. But the hatch, improperly secured in his haste, remained partially open. "They're buttoning up," Henderson shouted over the roar of gunfire. "It's working." The 8th Panther, at the rear of the column, began to traverse its turret, searching for the source of the fire. Mitchell immediately shifted his aim, pouring rounds into its vision ports. The turret stopped moving, the crew inside temporarily blinded by the continuous impacts. Mitchell had now fired nearly 300 rounds. His entire world had narrowed to the circle of his gun sight and the rhythm of his trigger control. Burst, brief pause, traverse, burst, brief pause. His arms ached from controlling the recoiling weapon. The barrel was getting dangerously hot, but he couldn't stop. Not yet. The Panthers, buttoned up and confused, began to react as Mitchell had predicted. Rather than coordinating their fire, each tank commander was making individual decisions based on limited information. Some began to move forward, trying to push through the kill zone. Others reversed, seeking cover. 2 of the Panthers' turrets traversed wildly, searching for a target they couldn't clearly see through their limited periscopes. "Now, Russo, move now," Hayes commanded. The Sherman's engine roared to life. Russo, one of the best drivers in the division, executed the maneuver perfectly. The tank lurched forward, then swung hard left, tracks churning the frozen ground. They covered the 50 yards to the barn ruins in seconds, the hull barely scraping past a destroyed wall as Russo positioned them in the shelter. Mitchell released the trigger on the 50 cal. His ears rang despite the tanker's helmet. Smoke rose from the machine gun's barrel. "Switching to main gun," Mitchell called out. The new position was perfect, exactly as he'd hoped. From here, they had a clear angle on the sides of at least 4 of the Panthers. The German tanks, still confused and partially blinded, hadn't yet identified the Sherman's new position. "Target, Panther at 3 o'clock, range 200 yards, armor piercing," Hayes commanded. "Identified," Mitchell confirmed, his eye already pressed to the main gun sight. The closest Panther was presenting its side armor, far thinner than its frontal protection. "Fire!" The Sherman rocked backward as the 75mm gun fired. The armor-piercing round, traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second, struck the Panther's side armor just below the turret ring. The angle was good. The range was close. The round penetrated. Inside the Panther, the armor-piercing shell created a devastating effect. Metal fragments from the penetration became deadly projectiles. The shell itself continued through the fighting compartment, destroying equipment and causing a catastrophic ammunition detonation. The Panther's turret lifted slightly from the force of the internal explosion, then settled back at an odd angle. Smoke began to pour from every hatch and opening. "Target destroyed! Loading armor piercing!" Henderson worked frantically, ejecting the spent shell casing and ramming a fresh round into the breach. "Next target, Panther, at 4 o'clock. Mitchell traversed right. Another Panther had finally located them and was beginning to bring its gun to bear. It was a race, and everything depended on who could fire first. "Identified! Fire!" The second armor-piercing round flew true, but the Panther had begun to move. The shell struck its side armor near the engine compartment. The impact was catastrophic. The Panther's engine erupted in flames. The tank lurched to a stop, immediately engulfed in burning fuel. 2 Panthers down. 6 to go. And now the Germans had definitely located them. "Traversing left, high explosive," Hayes commanded. "Take out those half-tracks before their infantry can set up anti-tank weapons." Mitchell swung the gun toward the support vehicles. The German infantry, recovering from their initial panic, were indeed trying to deploy Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets. Henderson loaded a high-explosive shell. Fire! The high-explosive round hit a half-track directly, detonating with a massive blast. The vehicle disintegrated, and nearby infantry were thrown to the ground by the concussion. But now the remaining Panthers were coordinating. 3 of them had positioned themselves to engage the Sherman's location. Their long-barreled guns were traversing, seeking their target. "Russo, back us out now. Move to the secondary position," Hayes ordered. The Sherman's engine screamed as Russo threw it into reverse. They backed out of the barn ruins just as the first Panther fired. The shell, an 85-pound projectile, tore through the barn wall where they had been positioned seconds before. Russo spun the tank, tracks churning, and drove hard toward a depression in the ground 50 yards away. 2 more Panther rounds cracked past them, one so close that it kicked up frozen earth that pattered against the Sherman's hull. "Position, loading armor piercing," Henderson called out. From the depression, they had a slightly elevated position with a view of the German column's flank. Mitchell could see 3 Panthers clearly, all with their sides partially exposed as they maneuvered. "Rapid fire! Engage at will," Hayes commanded. Mitchell didn't need to be told twice. He fired at the nearest Panther, reloaded, fired again at a second target. Henderson worked like a machine, loading, ejecting, loading again. The Sherman shook with each shot. The 3rd Panther took a hit in its track assembly. The track broke, whipping around the drive wheel before falling away. The tank slewed to a stop, immobile. Mitchell shifted aim to a 4th Panther. Fire, reload, fire. The 4th Panther's turret was traversing toward them when Mitchell's round struck it just below the gun mantlet. The shell penetrated, and moments later, the Panther's ammunition cooked off. The explosion was so violent that the tank's turret was blown completely off the hull, landing 10 feet away. But the Sherman had remained stationary too long. The other Panthers had their range now. A German shell struck the ground directly in front of them, showering the tank with earth and rock. Another hit the Sherman's frontal armor with a tremendous clang, but fortunately deflected off the sloped surface. "We're taking fire! Move again, Russo!" Hayes shouted. "Sir, we've got them on the run," Mitchell called out. 2 more are reversing. They're trying to retreat. It was true. The German commander, having lost 4 Panthers and seen another immobilized in less than 3 minutes, was ordering a withdrawal. The remaining mobile Panthers were backing away, laying smoke, trying to disengage. "One more. We can get one more," Mitchell urged. Hayes made a snap decision. "Do it! Then we pull back." Mitchell fired at a retreating Panther. The range was increasing, making the shot more difficult. The round struck the Panther's rear armor, the thinnest part of any tank. It penetrated, but the damage was less dramatic than previous hits. The Panther continued to reverse, though now trailing smoke from its engine compartment. "That's it! Russo, get us out of here now! Full speed back to friendly lines!" Hayes commanded. The Sherman turned and accelerated away from the crossroad. Behind them, the battlefield was a scene of destruction. 4 Panthers were complete losses, burning or destroyed. 1 was immobilized. Another was damaged and limping away. The half-tracks were wrecked. Infantry casualties among the Germans were severe. 1 Sherman, through an unapproved and unorthodox tactic, had shattered a German armored column. As they retreated through the forest, the crew was silent, each man processing what had just happened. Mitchell's arms trembled from exhaustion and adrenaline. Henderson leaned against the turret wall, his face pale. Coleman was praying quietly. Russo kept the tank moving at top speed, his knuckles white on the controls. Lieutenant Hayes remained in the turret hatch, scanning for pursuit, but none came. The surviving German tanks had withdrawn, likely reporting that they'd encountered a major American armored formation rather than a single tank. 2 hours later, Iron Prayer rolled into friendly lines near Manhay. The crew was immediately debriefed by intelligence officers who could barely believe their account. The claims seemed impossible. 1 Sherman against 8 Panthers? Surely there must have been other tanks involved, but reconnaissance patrols sent to the site confirmed it. 4 destroyed Panthers, 1 immobile, several damaged half-tracks, and numerous German casualties. The physical evidence matched Mitchell's and Hayes's account. The story of the engagement spread quickly through the division. Within days, it had reached higher command. The tactical innovation, using sustained machine gun fire to blind and confuse superior enemy armor before repositioning for flank shots, was studied and discussed. Some officers praised Mitchell's quick thinking, others criticized the risk involved, but no one could argue with the results. Mitchell was called before his battalion commander 3 days later. He stood at attention, expecting a reprimand, for his unorthodox tactics. Instead, the colonel studied him for a long moment before speaking. "Corporal Mitchell, what you did at that crossroads was either brilliant or insane. I'm still not sure which. You violated doctrine. You took a risk that should have gotten you and your crew eliminated, but you also stopped a Panther column that could have caused significant casualties to our forces. You showed initiative and creativity under pressure." The colonel paused, then continued. "I'm recommending you for the Silver Star. You're also being promoted to sergeant. But Mitchell, don't ever pull a stunt like that again unless you absolutely have to. Understood?" "Yes, sir. Understood, sir." But Mitchell and Hayes both knew that the tactic they'd employed that day would be used again. Already other tank crews were discussing it, adapting it, finding ways to implement the technique when faced with superior German armor. The idea of using continuous machine gun fire to blind and confuse enemy tanks, combined with rapid repositioning to achieve favorable angles, became part of the unofficial tactical repertoire of American tank crews in the closing months of the war. The Battle of the Bulge continued for another month. The German offensive ultimately failed. The Allies held, then counterattacked, pushing the Germans back to their original positions and beyond. Thousands of tanks were lost on both sides. Tens of thousands of soldiers perished in the frozen forests of the Ardennes. But at one small crossroads near Manhay, on a foggy morning in December 1944, one American tank crew had proven that ingenuity and courage could overcome superior firepower. Mitchell's unapproved burst pattern, his willingness to think beyond the manual and adapt to circumstances, had made the difference between victory and defeat. After the war, Mitchell returned to Georgia. He rarely spoke about his experiences, like many veterans of that conflict. He worked as a mechanic, married, raised a family. The Silver Star sat in a drawer, occasionally shown to curious grandchildren, but never displayed. Lieutenant Hayes returned to teaching, eventually becoming a principal at a high school in Ohio. He maintained correspondence with his crew for decades, organizing reunions when possible. In his classroom, he would sometimes tell his students about the importance of creative thinking, of being willing to challenge conventional wisdom when circumstances demanded it. He rarely mentioned the war directly, but those who knew him understood where those lessons had been learned. Henderson completed his medical studies after the war, becoming a surgeon. His steady hands, so valuable in loading tank shells under fire, served him well in the operating room. Russo returned to Brooklyn, taking over his father's construction business. Coleman became a minister, serving a small congregation in Tennessee. The crew of Iron Prayer had faced their moment of crisis and emerged victorious, not through superior equipment or numbers, but through innovation and teamwork. Mitchell's unapproved burst pattern had been born from observation, understanding of enemy psychology, and a willingness to risk everything on an untested theory. In the decades since, military historians have studied the engagement at Manhay. Some have pointed to it as an example of how junior leaders must be empowered to make tactical decisions in the chaos of combat. Others have noted how the incident demonstrated the importance of understanding enemy doctrine and psychology, not just enemy equipment. A few have even suggested that Mitchell's instinctive understanding of suppression effects and psychological warfare was ahead of its time. But perhaps the most important lesson was simpler. Sometimes the manual doesn't have all the answers. Sometimes survival and victory depend on individuals willing to think creatively, to take calculated risks, and to trust in their training and their crew. The Panthers that Mitchell's crew destroyed that morning were part of the 1st SS Panzer Division's spearhead. Intelligence reports later revealed that the column was heading toward a lightly defended American supply depot. Had they reached it, they would have disrupted supply lines to several American units at a critical moment in the battle. Mitchell's engagement delayed and disorganized that attack long enough for reinforcements to arrive and secure the depot. 1 tank, 5 men, 55 minutes of continuous action from first sighting to final withdrawal, and a tactical innovation that emerged not from a classroom or a manual, but from the mind of a young corporal who understood that sometimes the best solution is the one nobody has tried before. The morning fog that had concealed the German advance eventually burned away, revealing the full scope of the battlefield. The destroyed Panthers remained at the crossroads for days, serving as a grim reminder of the engagement. German recovery teams eventually hauled away the wrecks, but locals remembered the sight for years afterward. As the war in Europe entered its final months, the tactics developed in engagements like Mannheim became more common. American tank crews, initially outmatched by heavier German armor, learned to leverage their advantages: mobility, crew coordination, and tactical flexibility. They learned that fighting smart was as important as fighting hard. Mitchell's burst pattern, as it came to be informally known among some units, was one small part of this evolution. It wasn't a miracle solution or a guaranteed tactic. Used improperly or in the wrong circumstances, it could be disastrous. But when applied with intelligence and courage, combined with rapid maneuver and accurate gunnery, it gave American crews a tool they hadn't had before. The sound of that 50 caliber machine gun, firing in sustained bursts that December morning, echoed not just across the frozen Belgian landscape, but through the remaining months of the war. It was the sound of adaptation, of innovation under pressure, of individuals refusing to accept that superior enemy equipment meant inevitable defeat. Every military conflict produces such moments, instances where individual initiative and creative thinking alter the course of events. Most are never recorded. They happen in the chaos of combat and are forgotten in the larger narrative of campaigns and strategies. Mitchell's engagement at Mannheim might have been one of these forgotten moments, except that the results were so dramatic and the witnesses so credible that it couldn't be ignored. The official after-action report filed on December 20th, 1944, recorded the engagement in dry bureaucratic language. One M4 Sherman medium tank, call sign Iron Prayer, engaged and destroyed or disabled multiple enemy Panther tanks at map reference coordinates. Enemy column was disrupted and withdrew. Friendly casualties? None. Friendly vehicle. Minor damage to external fittings. Ammunition expended. The numbers and coordinates couldn't capture the tension, the fear, the split-second decisions, or the courage displayed that morning. But those who were there knew. The crew of Iron Prayer knew what they had faced and what they had achieved. And in the nights that followed, as they waited for sleep in foxholes and bivouacs, they replayed those minutes in their minds, wondering at their survival, grateful for their training, and proud of what they had accomplished together. The Sherman tank, often criticized for being undergunned and under-armored compared to its German counterparts, proved that day what many crews had known all along. It wasn't the best tank in the war, but in the hands of a skilled, coordinated crew willing to think beyond conventional tactics, it was good enough. And sometimes good enough, combined with courage and creativity, was all you needed. As darkness fell over the Ardennes on December 18, 1944, the crew of Iron Prayer shared rations and weak coffee, too tired for conversation, but bound together by the shared experience of battle. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled, a reminder that the war was far from over. But for that moment, they had survived. They had succeeded against overwhelming odds. And somewhere in the German lines, surviving crew members from the shattered Panther column were trying to explain to their commanders how one American tank had appeared from nowhere, blinded them with machine gun fire, and destroyed their formation before vanishing back into the fog and forest. It was a story their commanders found hard to believe. How could one tank accomplish what they described? But the burned-out hulls at the crossroads told their own story, one that would become part of the legend and lore of armored warfare, studied by future generations of tank crews. The story of how innovation, courage, and an unapproved burst pattern shattered a Panzer column and changed the course of a battle. The morning light that eventually came to the Ardennes revealed a landscape transformed by combat. The pristine snow was churned and blackened. The forest echoed with the sounds of continued fighting in other sectors. The Battle of the Bulge would rage for weeks more, claiming tens of thousands of lives before the German offensive was finally stopped and reversed. But at that one crossroads near Mannheim, the battle had already been decided, and the manner of that decision, the tactical innovation and courage displayed by 5 American tankers, would echo through the decades to come, not as a call for reckless bravery or abandonment of doctrine, but as a reminder that sometimes, when everything is on the line, thinking differently makes all the difference. Sergeant James Mitchell's unapproved burst pattern had done more than destroy enemy tanks. It had demonstrated something fundamental about warfare and human nature. That creativity and courage, combined with skill and teamwork, could overcome even the most daunting odds. That the human element, the ability to adapt and innovate in crisis, remained the most important factor in combat, regardless of technology or firepower. And on that cold December morning, 5 men in a Sherman tank named Iron Prayer had proven that truth in the most dramatic way possible.